The sun had just started rising over the city. The streets were quiet, but inside a huge glass mansion on the hill, something unusual was happening. Daniel Carter, one of the youngest billionaires in the city, sat alone in his large office. The room was beautiful, with tall windows, expensive furniture, and a perfect view of the skyline. But Daniel was not looking at the view. He was staring at a single paper on his desk. His face looked calm, but inside his mind, many thoughts were moving. Daniel had everything people dreamed about. He owned big companies, luxury cars, and houses in different countries. His life looked perfect to everyone. But Daniel had one problem. He did not know who truly loved him. Many people smiled at him. Many people respected him. But Daniel always wondered one thing. Did they love him, or did they love his money? Across the desk sat his best friend and lawyer, Marcus. Marcus leaned forward and spoke slowly. Daniel, if you want the truth, there's only one way to find it. Daniel looked up. What way? He asked. Marcus took a deep breath. You must pretend you lost everything. The room became very quiet. Daniel did not speak for a moment. Marcus continued. Tell everyone your company collapsed. Tell them your money is gone. Then watch what happens. Daniel stood up and walked toward the window. Far below, the city was waking up. Cars were starting to move. People were going to work. But Daniel's life was about to change. Finally, he turned back. Do it, Daniel said. And just like that, the test began. By afternoon, shocking news spread across the city. Daniel Carter had lost everything. News channels talked about it. Business websites posted stories. Investors were leaving his company. Banks were freezing accounts. His businesses were collapsing. At least, that was what everyone believed. Inside the mansion, Daniel waited quietly. Soon, the front door opened loudly. His fiancée, Victoria, walked inside quickly. Her high heels echoed on the marble floor. Victoria was beautiful and always dressed perfectly. Today she wore an expensive white coat and large sunglasses. But her face looked angry. What is this news I'm hearing? She demanded. Daniel stayed calm. It's true, he said softly. My company's failed. The banks took everything. Victoria stared at him. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then her expression slowly changed. You mean you're broke? She asked. Daniel nodded once. The reaction was instant. Victoria stepped back as if Daniel had become a stranger. Oh my God, she whispered. She removed the diamond engagement ring from her finger and placed it on the table. I can't do this, she said coldly. Daniel looked at her quietly. Victoria. But she interrupted him. I'm not marrying someone who has nothing. Without another word, she turned around and walked out of the mansion. The door closed loudly behind her. Daniel stood there in silence. In just 1 minute, his future had disappeared, but someone else had seen everything. Near the kitchen doorway stood a quiet young woman. She was the housemaid. Her name was Aisha. Unlike Victoria, she did not look angry. She looked worried. Later that evening, the mansion became empty. Most of the workers had already left after hearing the news. Daniel sat alone in the living room. Then he heard soft footsteps. Aisha slowly walked toward him. She held a small tray with tea. Sir, she said gently, placing the cup in front of him. Daniel looked up surprised. Aisha hesitated for a moment. Then she asked a simple question. Are you okay? Daniel stared at her. All day, no one had asked him that. Not his friends. Not his business partners. Not even the woman who promised to marry him. But the quiet maid had. Aisha did not know something important. Daniel Carter had not really lost his money. Everything that happened today was only a test. But what Daniel was about to discover in the coming days would change his life forever. The next morning, the big mansion felt very different. Only 2 days ago, the house was full of people. Workers moved everywhere. Phones rang all the time. Cars came and left from the long driveway. Now it was almost silent. The news about Daniel Carter losing everything had spread quickly across the city. People who once called him every day suddenly stopped calling. Business partners did not answer his messages. Even the house staff slowly started leaving. One by one, they packed their bags and said goodbye. Some looked sad. Some just looked nervous. By the end of the day, almost everyone was gone. But one person was still there. Aisha. That morning, Daniel walked slowly into the kitchen. He expected the room to be empty. But Aisha was standing near the stove, making breakfast. Daniel looked surprised. "Aisha, you're still here?" he asked. She turned and smiled politely. "Yes, sir," she said. Daniel frowned a little. "You heard the news. I lost everything. I can't pay salaries anymore." Aisha was quiet for a moment. Then she placed the plate of food on the table. "That's okay," she said calmly. Daniel blinked in confusion. "What do you mean, that's okay?" Aisha sat across from him. "Sir, when I first came to this city, I had nothing," she said softly. "I was looking for work everywhere. No one trusted me. No one wanted to hire me." She looked at Daniel. "But you gave me a chance." Daniel remembered that day. 3 years earlier, he had seen Aisha asking for work. She looked tired, nervous, and scared. Most people would have ignored her. But Daniel hired her without asking many questions. "I remember," Daniel said quietly. Aisha nodded. "You helped me when I needed help," she continued. "So I will stay and help you now." Daniel stared at her. Many people had promised loyalty to him before. But when his money disappeared, so did they. Yet the quiet maid was still here. "You don't have to do this," Daniel said. Aisha shook her head. "I want to." Daniel did not know what to say. For the first time since starting the test, something inside his heart felt warm. But Daniel also noticed something strange in the next few days. Aisha looked more tired than usual. Sometimes she came home very late at night. Other times, she woke up very early before sunrise. One evening, Daniel asked her, "Aisha, are you working somewhere else?" She looked surprised. "No, sir," she answered quickly. But Daniel noticed something in her eyes. She was hiding something. Later that night, Daniel stood near the window of the living room. The mansion was dark and quiet. He saw Aisha leaving the house quietly. She walked down the long driveway and disappeared into the street. Daniel felt curious. Where is she going every night? The next evening, Daniel decided to find out. When Aisha left the mansion again, Daniel followed her quietly in his car. They drove far away from the rich part of the city. Soon the streets looked very different. The houses became smaller. The buildings looked old. Finally, Aisha stopped near a small apartment building. Daniel parked his car and watched from a distance. Aisha entered the building. A few minutes later, a small window light turned on. Daniel slowly walked closer. Then he looked through the window, and what he saw surprised him. Inside the small room were 3 little children. They ran toward Aisha happily. "Big sister," one of them shouted. They hugged her tightly. Aisha smiled and hugged them back. Daniel suddenly understood. Aisha was not only working as a maid. She was taking care of her younger brothers and sister. All alone, Daniel stepped back slowly. He felt shocked. The woman who stayed to help him was fighting her own difficult life every day. But the biggest surprise was still coming. Because Daniel had not yet seen how far Aisha was willing to go to help him. Daniel stood quietly outside the small apartment building. The street was dark and silent. A weak yellow light from the street lamp fell on the broken sidewalk. This place was very different from the rich neighborhood where his mansion stood. Daniel slowly stepped closer to the window. Inside the small apartment, he saw something that made his heart feel heavy. 3 little children were sitting around a small wooden table. The table had simple food on it, bread and soup. Aisha sat with them. The youngest girl, maybe 6 years old, held Aisha's arm tightly. "Did you bring food today?" the little girl asked. Aisha smiled warmly. "Yes, I did," she said gently. The little boy, who looked around 8 years old, spoke next. "Did you work very hard again today, big sister?" Aisha laughed softly. "It's okay. I'm strong." Daniel watched everything in silence. He realized something very important. Aisha was not just working as a maid. She was also a mother, a sister, and a protector for these children. One of the older boys suddenly asked a question. "Are the rich people you work for kind to you?" Aisha paused for a moment. Then she answered quietly, "Yes, my boss is a good man." Daniel felt a strange feeling in his chest when he heard that. Inside the apartment, Aisha helped the children eat dinner. She fixed their clothes and helped them with school books. After dinner, she tucked the youngest girl into a small bed near the wall. "Good night," Aisha whispered softly. "Good night, big sister," the girl replied. Daniel slowly stepped away from the window. His mind was full of thoughts. For years, he had believed he understood people. But tonight, he realized something. He knew almost nothing about the quiet maid who worked in his house. The next morning, Daniel acted normal. He sat at the dining table while Aisha prepared breakfast. She looked tired again. Her eyes showed that she had not slept much. "Aisha," Daniel said calmly. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Did you sleep well last night?" Aisha nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." But Daniel knew the truth now. She was lying to protect her privacy. Daniel looked at her carefully. He noticed something else too. Her hands had small cuts. Her shoes looked old and worn, but she still worked quietly, never complaining. Later that day, Daniel spoke to Marcus on the phone. Marcus asked, "How's the test going?" Daniel took a deep breath. "People are showing their true faces," he said. Marcus laughed lightly. "I told you they would." Daniel stayed silent for a moment. Then he added something unexpected. "But one person is different." Marcus sounded curious. "Who?" "The maid," Daniel answered. Marcus was surprised. "The maid?" "Yes," Daniel said. "She stayed when everyone left." Marcus paused for a second. "Maybe she just needs the job." Daniel slowly shook his head. "No, it's more than that." Daniel did not tell Marcus what he had seen the night before, but something inside him had changed. That evening, Aisha brought Daniel a simple dinner. "Sir, I'm sorry the food is very basic now," she said quietly. Daniel looked at the plate. It was simple rice and vegetables. But he smiled. "It's perfect," he said. Aisha looked surprised. Most rich people he knew would complain about food like this. But Daniel ate quietly and thanked her. That night, while sitting alone in his room, Daniel thought about everything he had seen. A woman with almost nothing, still helping him, still staying, still smiling. But Daniel did not know something yet. A very difficult moment was coming soon. And when that moment arrived, Aisha would make a sacrifice that would shock him completely. Days passed, and life inside the big mansion became quieter and harder. Daniel continued acting like a man who had lost everything. The electricity bill arrived. The water bill arrived. Letters from the bank arrived. Every letter looked worse than the one before. Daniel knew all of it was part of the test. Marcus was controlling everything secretly. But Aisha did not know that. To her, the situation was real. One evening, Daniel sat in the living room looking tired. Papers were spread across the table. He pretended to be worried. Aisha walked in slowly. "Sir, is everything okay?" she asked softly. Daniel sighed and rubbed his forehead. "The bank is asking for money," he said. "If I don't pay soon, they will take the house." Aisha's eyes widened. "The house too," she whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. For a moment, the room became silent. Aisha stood there thinking. Daniel watched her carefully. He wanted to see what she would do. Finally, she spoke. "Sir, don't worry," she said. Daniel looked up. "It will be okay." Daniel forced a small smile, but inside he was curious. How could it be okay? The next day, Aisha left the mansion very early. She looked serious and quiet. Daniel noticed something strange again. She looked nervous. He did not follow her this time. But the whole day, Daniel could not stop thinking about it. Late that evening, Aisha returned to the mansion. She walked inside slowly. Her eyes looked tired, and her hands were shaking slightly. "Sir," she said. Daniel looked up from the couch. "Yes, Aisha." She walked toward him and placed a small envelope on the table. Daniel frowned. "What is this?" Aisha pushed the envelope toward him. "Please take it." Daniel opened the envelope slowly. Inside was money. Not a huge amount, but still a lot for someone like Aisha. Daniel looked shocked. "Aisha, where did this come from?" Aisha looked down at the floor. "I sold something," she said quietly. Daniel felt confused. "What did you sell?" Aisha hesitated. Then she slowly pulled out a small, empty chain from her pocket. The necklace was missing. Daniel remembered that necklace. It was old and simple, but Aisha always wore it. He had seen her touch it many times. "Aisha, was that your necklace?" Daniel asked. She nodded slowly. "It belonged to my mother," she said. "My mother gave it to me before she passed away." Daniel felt a heavy silence fall in the room. "That was your last memory of her," Daniel said. Aisha nodded again. "But you sold it." Aisha forced a small smile. "You need help right now," she said. "Memories are important, but people are more important." Daniel stared at her in disbelief. He could not believe what he was hearing. The woman who had almost nothing, had just sacrificed the most important thing she owned. And she did it to help him. Aisha, I can't take this, Daniel said, pushing the envelope back. But she shook her head quickly. Please take it, sir. You gave me a job when I was desperate. Now it's my turn to help. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had never expected this. His test was meant to reveal fake people. But instead, it revealed something far more powerful. A heart full of kindness. Daniel looked at the envelope again. For the first time since the test began, he felt guilty. Very guilty. Because the truth was simple. Daniel Carter was not poor. Everything was still part of the test. But if Aisha ever discovered that, Daniel wondered if she would ever forgive him. And soon, the truth would come closer than he expected. Because someone from Daniel's past was about to return. 2 days passed after Aisha sold her necklace. Daniel could not stop thinking about it. The small envelope with money was still on his desk. Every time he looked at it, he remembered Aisha's quiet voice and the way she said, "People are more important than memories." For the first time in his life, Daniel felt something strange. He felt ashamed. His test had started as a simple plan to discover who truly cared about him. But now the situation felt heavier. Aisha had sacrificed something very precious for him, and she still believed he had lost everything. One morning, Daniel was sitting in the garden, thinking deeply. The large fountain in the center of the garden was turned off to save electricity. The mansion looked less beautiful without the sound of running water. Aisha walked outside, carrying a tray with tea. "Good morning, sir," she said gently. Daniel nodded. "Good morning, Aisha." She placed the cup on the table and smiled softly. "You should not worry too much," she said. "Sometimes life becomes difficult, but good things return." Daniel looked at her quietly. Her words were simple, but they carried hope. At that moment, the loud sound of a car stopped them both. A long black luxury car entered the driveway. Daniel immediately recognized it. His expression changed slightly. The car door opened. Victoria stepped out. She looked just as elegant as before, wearing expensive clothes and sunglasses. But this time her face looked different. Instead of anger, there was nervousness. Aisha watched quietly from a distance as Victoria walked toward Daniel quickly. "Daniel," Victoria called. Daniel stood up slowly. "Victoria," he said calmly. Victoria walked closer and looked at him carefully. "I heard something unbelievable today," she said. Daniel stayed silent. Victoria continued. "The news says your companies are recovering. Investors are returning. Your businesses are not destroyed anymore." Daniel did not answer. Victoria stepped closer. "So, you're not completely broke anymore?" Daniel crossed his arms. "I'm still struggling," he said. Victoria's face softened instantly. Relief appeared in her eyes. "Oh, Daniel," she said dramatically. "I was so worried about you." Daniel looked at her without emotion. "Were you?" Victoria nodded quickly. "Of course. I just needed time to think about everything." Daniel remembered the moment she threw the engagement ring and walked away without hesitation. But now she stood here again. "I made a mistake," Victoria said suddenly. "I shouldn't have left like that." She reached for his hand. "Daniel, I still love you." Aisha watched from the side of the garden. She looked uncomfortable and slowly started to walk away. But Daniel stopped her. "Aisha, please stay," he said. She hesitated but stopped walking. Victoria noticed her and frowned slightly. "The maid can leave," Victoria said coldly. But Daniel shook his head. "No, she stays." Victoria looked annoyed but ignored it. She turned back to Daniel and spoke sweetly. "Daniel, we can fix everything. We can continue our engagement. We can plan the wedding again." Daniel looked directly into her eyes. Then he asked one simple question. "If I was still poor, would you stay?" Victoria froze. Her confident smile slowly disappeared. For several seconds, she said nothing. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Daniel noticed everything. Her silence gave him the answer. Behind him, Aisha lowered her eyes quietly. She did not want to watch this moment. But Daniel suddenly realized something very important. One woman returned when she believed his money was coming back. The other woman stayed when she believed he had lost everything. And now Daniel knew something clearly. The test was almost finished. But the biggest truth was still waiting to be revealed. Because soon, Daniel Carter would show everyone the truth behind his loss. The garden became very quiet after Daniel asked his question. If I was still poor, would you stay? Victoria stood frozen in front of him. For a few seconds, she forced a small smile, trying to look confident again. Daniel, why are you asking strange questions? She said lightly. Of course I would stay. But Daniel's eyes stayed calm and serious. Then why did you leave the moment you thought I lost everything? He asked. Victoria's smile slowly faded. That was different, she said quickly. I was shocked. Anyone would react like that. Daniel did not respond immediately. Behind him, Aisha stood quietly. She felt uncomfortable being part of such a personal moment. Sir, maybe I should go inside, she said softly. But Daniel shook his head. No, Aisha, please stay. Victoria crossed her arms. Why does she need to stay? She asked with irritation. She's just a maid. Daniel looked at Victoria carefully. Because she's the only person who stayed when everyone else left. Victoria looked confused. What are you talking about? Daniel turned toward the house. Aisha, please call Marcus and ask him to come here. Aisha nodded and walked inside the mansion. Victoria looked impatient. What's going on, Daniel? You'll see, he said calmly. About 20 minutes later, another car arrived at the mansion. Marcus stepped out, holding a black folder. Victoria looked confused again. Why is your lawyer here? Daniel walked toward Marcus. Thank you for coming, Daniel said. Marcus nodded slightly and handed him the folder. Then Daniel turned back toward Victoria. There is something I need to tell you, he said. Victoria looked hopeful. Good, because this situation is becoming very strange. Daniel opened the folder slowly. Inside were documents, bank reports, and business papers. Then Daniel spoke calmly. My company's never collapsed. Victoria blinked. What? The news about my bankruptcy was not real. Victoria stared at him in shock. You're joking. Daniel shook his head. It was all part of a test. Marcus stepped forward and confirmed it. We created the story together, Marcus explained. We wanted to see how people would react if Daniel lost his money. Victoria's face turned pale. A test? She whispered. Daniel nodded. Yes. You lied to everyone. Victoria shouted angrily. Daniel stayed calm. No, I simply removed the money from the picture. Victoria looked furious. This is insane. Daniel closed the folder and looked directly at her. What is insane, he said quietly, is how quickly you walked away. Victoria tried to defend herself. You embarrassed me. You tricked me. But Daniel shook his head again. I revealed the truth. Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. Daniel then turned toward Aisha, who had returned and was standing near the door. She looked confused and nervous. Sir, I don't understand, she said. Daniel walked toward her slowly. Aisha, he said gently, I was never poor. Her eyes widened. You mean the house, the money, everything? Yes, Daniel replied. It was all part of a test. Aisha looked shocked. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she remembered something. The money I gave you, she whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. I know. Aisha looked down, embarrassed. I'm sorry if it was not enough. Daniel felt his heart tighten again. Even now, she was apologizing. But Daniel was not finished. He turned back toward Victoria. This test showed me something important, Daniel said. Victoria looked at him angrily. And what is that? Daniel glanced toward Aisha. That true loyalty cannot be bought with money. Victoria looked at Aisha with disbelief. You're choosing her over me? Daniel did not answer immediately, but the answer was already clear. And soon, Daniel Carter would make a decision that would change all of their lives forever. The air in the garden felt heavy after the truth came out. Victoria stood there with anger in her eyes. Aisha stood near the door, confused and quiet. Marcus watched silently. Daniel Carter looked at both women. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. So this was all a game to you? She said angrily. Daniel shook his head. It was never a game, he replied calmly. It was a way to see the truth. Victoria laughed bitterly. Well, you saw it. Now what? Daniel looked directly into her eyes. Now I moved forward. Victoria crossed her arms. You're making a mistake, she said sharply. People like her don't belong in your world. The words were cold. Aisha lowered her head, feeling embarrassed. She slowly stepped back. "Sir, I should leave," she said quietly. But Daniel stopped her. "Aisha, wait." She looked up surprised. Daniel walked toward Victoria first. He picked up the diamond engagement ring that she had thrown on the table days earlier. For a moment, Victoria's face filled with hope. But Daniel did something unexpected. He placed the ring in Victoria's hand. "Our engagement is over," he said calmly. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. "You're serious?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." Victoria looked furious. "You're throwing away your future for a maid?" Daniel answered quietly. "No, I'm choosing honesty over lies." Victoria shook her head angrily. "You'll regret this." She turned around and walked toward her car quickly. The sound of her heels echoed loudly across the driveway. Moments later, her car disappeared down the road. The garden became quiet again. Now only Daniel and Aisha remained. Aisha looked nervous. "Sir, I didn't want to cause problems," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "You didn't cause anything." Aisha still looked uncomfortable. "I think it's better if I leave this job," she said. Daniel looked surprised. "Why would you leave?" Aisha hesitated. "You deserve someone from your own world," she said quietly. "Someone rich. Someone important." Daniel slowly walked closer to her. "Aisha, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "When everyone believed I was poor, why did you stay?" Aisha thought for a moment. Then she answered honestly. "Because you were kind to me when I needed help." Daniel listened carefully. "You didn't stay for money?" Aisha shook her head. "No." Daniel smiled slightly. "You even sold your mother's necklace." Aisha looked down again. "It was only a necklace," she said softly. Daniel's voice became gentle. "No, it was the most valuable thing you had." Aisha stayed silent. Daniel reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, simple box. Aisha looked confused. "What is that?" she asked. Daniel opened the box slowly. Inside was a small, simple ring. Not a big diamond. Not expensive. Just a clean, simple ring. Aisha's eyes widened. "Sir, what are you doing?" Daniel looked directly at her. "All my life, people respected me because of money," he said. "But when the money disappeared, almost everyone disappeared too." He paused. "Except you." Aisha's eyes filled with tears. Daniel continued softly. "I don't want someone who loves my wealth. I want someone who would stay even if I had nothing." He held the ring toward her. "Aisha, I don't want a maid in my house. I want a partner in my life." Aisha covered her mouth in shock. "Sir, I'm not like you," she whispered. Daniel smiled gently. "That's exactly why I'm asking." For a moment, the world around them felt completely quiet. Then slowly, Aisha nodded. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she smiled. Daniel placed the ring on her finger. For the first time since the test began, Daniel Carter felt completely sure of something. He had searched for loyalty in a world full of wealth. But true love had been standing quietly in his house the entire time. Not in diamonds, not in luxury, but in the heart of a woman who chose kindness, even when she had nothing.